Okay, afternoon, Year 11. Welcome to episode 1 of Mr. MALTBY's home learning. Today we're going to be looking at the nervous system. Now, before we get stuck into that, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So just wanted to make sure that you've received my kind of guidance on how we're going to be doing our lessons moving forward. Make sure that you've downloaded Teams, because that's how we're going to communicate. Make sure that you're checking Go for Schools. Okay, for the most recent work, which will be set on a Monday and due on a Monday, the following Monday, and make sure you're checking your emails as well, because we'll send out some stuff through emails. Before heading on with this video, please make sure that you have done the initial tasks at the start, which was to do some pre-reading and some notes, and to complete the review task on Seneca. So before you go any further in this video, make sure you've had a look at the Go for Schools work, and make sure you've done that pre-reading and the review task before this. Okay, here we go. So you're probably wondering why we've got a whole load of eyes on the screen. Normally in class we'd do like a demonstration here, which links into what we're going to be doing today. And actually you could probably do this in front of the mirror. So if you have got a mirror, all you need to do is go to the mirror, close your eyes as tight as you possibly can, blocking out all the light from your eye. And then you can count for 10 seconds, all right? So you can pause the video now, count for 10 seconds. As soon as you open your eyes, you should be able to notice that your pupil will be changing shape. And in fact, the pupil gets much, much smaller. And so at this point, I want to pause the video and think why that is. Why does the pupil get much, much smaller as soon as that light is starting to enter the eye? Now, having paused the video, having had to think about that, we can then move on to try to explain why that is. Now, of course, this is an example of a reflex action. It is completely involuntary. Okay, as you open your eyes, you get a flood of light coming in to your eyes, and your pupils will become much, much smaller in diameter. The muscles in your eye respond, okay, and decrease the diameter of your pupil to let less light in. This is an example of a reflex action which has a protective function. If too much light is hitting the retina, that could cause damage. And so this is an example of a reflex action that we're going to think about today. And we're going to introduce the nervous system and look at the nervous system and different types of neurons and things in today's lesson. So here we go. Okay, so we'll be looking at the structure and function of the nervous system. You would have done some pre-reading and made some notes on introduction to homeostasis. This comes under kind of homeostasis response, and you've done some introductory reading and notes on that with some summary questions. We're now moving straight into the structure and function of the nervous system. And through the next few weeks, we'll be looking at homeostasis in more detail, but this is kind of a standalone lesson really, focused on the nervous system. So I need to explain the importance of being able to respond to the environment and coordinate our behaviour. Of course, we use various systems to control our body, and the nervous system is vital for coordinating our actions. Explain how the nervous system is adapted for its functions. We'll look at 3 key neurons, and we're going to describe the functions, the main structures of the nervous system, including those 3 main neurons. We'll also look at the higher tier stuff, which is the synapses that form between each neuron, and kind of explain that process as well of synaptic transmission. Now, the example I like to use throughout this lesson is, in essence, we're trying to explain how we respond to our environment, how we have a stimulus leading to a response, and a lot goes on from stimulus to response. The example that I like to use is if you imagine that you are on a Saturday morning and you're cooking your favourite breakfast. I'm partial to beans on toast, love a bit of beans on toast, and I want you to imagine this scenario. We're going to refer back to this scenario. So we've got a bowl of beans we've chucked in the microwave, and maybe we've been distracted by the news, perhaps we've been distracted by the latest coronavirus news, and we've left the beans in the microwave for a little bit too long. Anyway, the microwave goes off, it pings, and obviously the beans are ready. Now I run to the microwave and I'm going to pick up those bowl of beans. You know that the automatic reaction, without even consciously thinking, would be to drop that hot bowl of beans directly on the floor, and that is to protect us. I didn't pick up the bowl of beans and go for a few seconds. Oh, hang on a minute, this bowl of beans is boiling hot. I should probably put it down, because involving conscious thought in something like that would lead to damage of the skin. So here again is another example of a reflex action. Okay, that we're going to try and unpick today in today's lesson. That we have these reflex actions that protect us. Now, normally I would do a kind of reading comprehension task and think about key terms, make a list of key terms here. I want you to pause the video. It's kind of an introductory kind of paragraphs around the nervous system. And what I'd like you to do is to make sure you have the title there, the nervous system, and to slowly read through this paragraph, this introductory paragraph, and to pull out a list of key terms which we'll return to over the next few lessons. So at this point, just pause the video, make sure you get the title, the nervous system, have a read through these couple of paragraphs, and to make a list of key terms. If you'd like to make further notes from this introductory paragraph, then you're more than welcome, but at this point you need to pause the video to do that. Okay, moving on. So we're going to think about three main types of neurons, also known as nerves. Nerves and neurons is exactly the same. Okay, they mean the same thing. We can use either, but we like to use neurons as it's more scientific. So there's three types. Usually at this point we would have information sheets around the room and you'd go and collect information, but we're going to go through each one one by one. I'm going to explain the key role of each of these neurons that are in the nervous system and the function, how they all kind of link up. And your job really is to draw each one into your book and to make notes on the key functions of each one. So on to the first one. Feel free to pause the video at any point if you want to draw this into your book. So we're going to have a picture of the neuron, okay, and then we're going to make our key notes there. So the key thing to remember here, just to start off with, in terms of this word neuron or nerve cell, that it is a cell, okay? And if we take our example of picking up that hot plate, it is the first neuron that carries that nerve impulse from the sense organ, okay, up to the CNS, or the central nervous system. So we've got here our sensory neurons. And if we use our example, we're going to have receptors in our sense organ, in our skin cell, in our skin, touching that hot plate, and the receptors will turn that stimuli of an increased temperature into an electrical impulse. And that electrical impulse will travel, first of all, down your sensory neurons. So imagine the sensory neurons from your fingertips all the way up your arm. It's going to carry that sensory information because we're responding to a sensory stimulus here, an increase in temperature. It's going to take that electrical signal all the way up the sensory neuron up to the central nervous system. In this case, it will be the spinal cord. So sensory neurons here are nerves that transmit sensory information, sound, sight sound, feeling, etc., to the central nervous system, the brain, and the spinal cord. So in our example, we picked up the hot plate, and that sensory information is being transmitted as an electrical impulse all the way up the sensory neuron. When that message reaches the spinal cord, it will synapse, and we'll come to synapse later on. There's just a gap between two neurons. It will synapse with a relay neuron. And relay neurons are much shorter. Relay neurons are short nerves which carry nerves from one part of the CNS to another. They connect the sensory and the motor neurons. They connect the sensory and the motor neurons. And these short relay neurons are found only in the central nervous system, the spinal cord, or the brain. And you can think of this as kind of like a relay race. They're kind of passing on the message to the next neuron. Again, with the cell body, the nervous impulse from the sense organ, nervous impulse then to the motor neuron, which is our final neuron. So you see the structure is slightly different here. Motor neurons are nerves carrying information from the brain and spinal cord to the muscle or gland. And we call the muscle or the gland the effector because it brings about the response. We have stimulus and response. And we call the muscle or the gland the effector. In this case, in the example that we're using, that sensory information has gone up our arm, up to the relay neuron, and then now back down the motor neuron. I guess we can think of motor as in movement, and in this case, the motor neuron will synapse with the muscles in my arm and my hand to allow me then to drop the plate. And of course, all this happens very, very quickly indeed. So again, make sure you're pausing the video and drawing your diagrams in detail, labelling them, as well as adding the information to your diagrams. So So just as a summary then, sensory neurons transmit sensory information from the receptors to the brain and the spinal cord, which we call the central nervous system. The relay neurons are exactly that, kind of passing on the message. They connect the sensory neuron and the motor neurons, and they're found in the CNS. The motor neurons carry signals from the CNS to the effectors, and that's where we then have our response. Now we can put this all together in a kind of a nice flow diagram. So I'd like you to draw this flow diagram into your book because it brings it all together. And again, we can think about our example of picking up that hot plate. We start with a stimulus. And in this case, of course, it is that increase in temperature. We can also define a stimulus as a change in the environment. And in this case, we've got the change in the environment being temperature, that really, really hot plate. Our receptors, often nerve endings, are in our sense organs, and in this case we've got the skin as the sense organ. We often don't think of the skin as an organ, but of course it's made of specialised cells that form tissues that form the organ that is our skin. We are covered in the organ that is skin, right? And the receptors in our fingers will detect that change in temperature and turn that into an electrical impulse, which immediately gets transmitted down the sensory neuron. The sensory neuron will then synapse, with the relay neuron, and a synapse will come to that. A synapse is a gap between two neurons, and we're going to talk about why we need a synapse and the purpose of a synapse. And we'll come to that later on. Relay neuron in our central nervous system will then synapse with the motor neuron, again taking that electrical impulse down our arm, and the example that we've used to then synapse with the effector, which is a muscle or a gland. Muscles contract, we need to know that word, and glands secrete hormones. So in this case, the muscle is contracting to move my arm away from that hot plate and to let go of it. And of course, from stimulus all the way down to the effector, through these processes, we have the response of dropping the plate. And like I said at the start, this is all involuntary, right? We don't pick up the hot plate and go, oh, blimey, this is really, really hot, I better drop it. Right? If we did that, we'd scald our hands even more. Right? So the purpose of this is it's an unconscious, immediate, automatic reaction which protects us. Okay, so the reflex arc, I'd like you to draw this into your book, and it's something that does pop up in the exam, being able to recognise this and to be able to label the different parts of the reflex arc. What you're looking at on the right hand side is a cross section of a vertebrae, of your spine. So if you can probably imagine your favourite teacher. If you chopped their head off and you were to look down their neck, you'd see this kind of transverse cross section here of the spine. Right. So I'd like you to draw this in. Pause the video now. And to draw this into your book fully labelled, with all the keywords that we've kind of mentioned today. Okay, to have then some additional notes underneath that diagram, just to bring this all together. The reflex actions are automatic and rapid. They are protective actions that involve sensory relay and motor neurons. A stimulus, or a stimuli plural, is a change in the environment. In the case that we looked at, it was temperature. Receptors detect the change in the nerve cell in an organ, for example, the eye. And we're going to look at various examples. We have various types of receptors in various different sense organs which perform a particular function. We're going to look at some examples in a minute. The receptor turns the stimulus into the electrical signal that is passed from the sensory neurons to the brain and spinal cord. In the brain and spinal cord, the message is passed through a relay neuron, a short nerve cell that connects the sensory neuron to the motor neuron. This passes the signal back to the effector, a muscle or gland that causes the response. And of course, the response in this case was us dropping that hot plate. Okay, so we've mentioned the word synapse a couple of times, and if we were to zoom, if I go back a couple of slides, if we were to zoom in, you can see my cursor to this point here, where one neuron ends and another neuron, the relay neuron, begins. In between is a gap. You might think, why on earth does there need to be a gap? Well, this gap is called the synapse. And you can see here, as an electrical impulse arrives, we have what's known as vesicles, which contain neurotransmitters. These are chemical messengers. and these vesicles fuse with the presynaptic membrane, releasing the neurotransmitters into the synapse, or we can also refer to this as the synaptic cleft or gap. These chemicals will diffuse from a high concentration to a low concentration and bind on to this very specific receptor site. Only then will the electrical impulse then carry on. Now the key purpose for having this synapse is to make sure that this electrical impulse travels in one direction. You will only find the vesicles of neurotransmitters on the presynaptic neuron and the correct receptors on the postsynaptic neuron. And of course these receptors are specific to specific neurotransmitters that can either be excitatory or inhibitory, okay, depending on the type of neurotransmitter that's being released. Now the main thing we need to know is that at GCSE level is that these neurotransmitters diffuse from high to low concentration to then allow them to bind to the next neuron to allow that electrical impulse to carry on. And the reason why we have these synapses is to ensure that the message is going in that correct one direction. So again, pause the video, have a listen to what I've just described, and you're going to draw a diagram of this with some annotations around it. Okay, lastly we're going to think about some specific sense organs, okay, and identify the stimulus for these particular sense organs. Now I think what we'll do is actually we're going to skip straight to our table here, okay. Well, let's do this first. So you can have a little discussion maybe with some family members and think about, for the following reflexes, identify the stimulus, receptor, effector, and response. So think about these examples. We've used the drop-in hot plate example. I want you to think about these practical examples. Stimulus, what is the change in the environment in these examples? Receptors, where are the receptors? Where are the receptors that pick up the change in the environment? Effector, is that a muscle or a gland, and where is that? And what is the actual response? What is the response in this particular example? So just have a discussion around that, pause the video for a few minutes, and you can just have a think about how we're applying this knowledge to these three examples. Okay, next onto this table. I'd like you to draw the table into your book, and you're going to think about the sense here that we've got, the sense organ, the receptors, and then the stimulus as well. So kind of bringing this together with some specific examples, thinking about our own sense organs. So at this point, pause the video and draw the table into your book and have a go at filling in the gaps. Okay, just going through the examples then. The first one you should have found fairly easy, and the second column may have required a bit of research, a bit of Googling to find out these key examples. And of course, the stimulus matches directly to our sense organ and sense. Okay. Now, the last thing I wanted to have a look at was just this exam question. And a couple of years ago, this exam question came up. I kind of threw a few people off. You need to be able to recognise this as a neuron. Okay, and here you've got a light-sensitive cell, which you'd obviously find in your eye, responding to light. And all this question was actually doing was asking you to label this diagram, and it threw lots of people off. Because we know this is a nerve cell, this is simply pointing to, and I'll use my cursor here, cytoplasm and the cell membrane. And I just wanted to highlight this as a point, because we need to recognise that neurons, aka nerves, are cells. They have a nucleus, they have cytoplasm, and they have cell membrane. In this particular example, we're looking at a light-sensitive cell, connecting them to our neurons here. So just be mindful of that. Okay, back to our learning outcomes then, and what I'd like you to do then is to make sure that you complete the final few tasks, which are to go onto Seneca. There should be some tasks to do on Seneca there. If you have any questions at all following this video, then please get onto Teams, ask away, and obviously I welcome any feedback on these videos. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe.